Government Events Roundtable. And today we have two very controversial guests. And my guests are Paul Koukouris, who is the president of the Illinois Dunesland Preservation Society. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've been trying to get you on my show, and I finally did.
Glad to be here.
And you brought today Jeffrey Cahnmann, who is the president of Cahnmann Environmental Services. Welcome, Jeff. Welcome to the show. And I want to, first of all, this is going to be a very controversial show today. And as you see, the title of our show is Asbestos on the Illinois Lake Michigan Shoreline, and which I fixed from the government scientific fraud on asbestos on the Illinois Lake Michigan Shoreline. So that is a big mouthful. And when we say fraud, I wonder what that really means. And I think, Paul, you gave me the title to begin with, so I'm going to let you handle what you were talking about, government fraud on the Illinois Lake Michigan shoreline as far as asbestos, the findings of asbestos. So I want you to let my viewers know what is going on.
Well, sure. It's twofold, and we all know about politics and how politics sometimes governs what goes on. But we also have a subject that is popular in this country, and unfortunately, and that's scientific fraud. That's where studies and reports are rigged and cooked. In other words, they're designed in a way that is unscientific in the sense that you already design what the conclusion will be. And so therefore you're not into scientific truth, you're into finding out, for the public's sake, what the issues are, and then you want to tell the public what you think the results are. That's scientific fraud, and it's prevalent here in the state of Illinois.
It sounds like the study shows the what they want the outcome to be.
That's correct.
Okay, that's what it is. For my viewers, because sometimes we're talking, you know, I've always had professionals on my show, and I want to break it down to what the real issue is that changing results for the benefit of the person that wants to change the benefits for.
Right. You get into a situation where you change the protocols in the lab when you begin to do your analysis, and you find that they're not quite going where you thought. There may be more pollution or less pollution, so you alter the methodology. You then alter standards that are out there, protocols. And as you modify and remodify, then you, in essence, can change all the results. And that's what's happening here in the state of Illinois. And there was a report that the Attorney General put out on asbestos for the Illinois shoreline, and it's riddled with this kind of misrepresentation.
Wow. And, you know, I'm going to ask you, Jeff, because you're an environmental scientist, and you mentioned to me earlier that most of Illinois has microscopic asbestos invisible fibers on the beaches. And, you know, I'm thinking about it because I have, you know, a lot of us have children, a lot of us have grandchildren, and they're playing on our beaches. And you know what children do? They sit on the beach themselves, and they play with their pails, and they make castles and all kinds of things. And what's happening? Is the fibers, the microscopic asbestos fibers, is it going into their lungs? What's happening in a situation like this?
Well, asbestos is an airborne hazard, so there were some studies that found asbestos in sand all along the shoreline. When I first discovered this, I was called in by Paul to take a look at Illinois Beach State Park, which is about a 7.5-mile park from the Wisconsin border down to Waukegan. And apparently asbestos had been washing up on the shorelines there. And Paul had quickly discovered that there was an old asbestos manufacturing plant up there that had operated from about 1920 to about 1985. And they had...
and the name of that plant was?
Johns Manville. They manufactured a lot of asbestos-related material. And historical information shows they had what was called a white ditch, which was literally asbestos waste pouring into the lake for years. A lot of the material had been just fly dumped into the lake. And we uncovered that right next door to this John Mansville pollution site, Commonwealth Edison had been dredging sand because they used water from Lake Michigan to cool off their turbines. they had been dredging the sand, and the state of Illinois took the sand that they dredged, which was contaminated with asbestos, and dumped it on the park. And so back in the late 1990s, they found significant amounts of asbestos on the beach, required a big cleanup. And so in order for the state to say the beach was safe for people to reoccupy again, to open it back up to the public, they decided to test some background areas up in Milwaukee, down in Waukegan, in Highland Park. They actually tested on the shoreline, and then in Oak Street Beach. And the study that was conducted found that asbestos existed not only in the contaminated beach areas, but some of the highest levels of contamination were found in Highland Park and at Oak Street Beach in Chicago,
wow.
which the Attorney General quickly shelved that information and really kind of sheltered it from the public. So that really got us going on this issue.
I don't understand. Why would the Attorney General, and I believe that Warren Buffett, he is also in control over this company now, which is called the what is it,
Berkshire Hathaway. Right.
Berkshire Hathaway, which is also owned by Warren Buffett. I mean, why would somebody want to shelve something if you have something that's so important for the public? And I think we talked about it. Maybe to have a test maybe would run around $700. Plus, you would have to get somebody to oversee it. Maybe the whole thing would cost a couple of $1,000s. Just the safety of our children, the safety of the people, the safety of our dogs, because people walk their dogs on beaches too. I mean, these little puppies, these little designer dogs that are so cute, and they're in the sand, they're breathing the particles. I mean, why did the Attorney General, knowing that there's no safety, or there's a problem with possible, alleged, I can't say for sure because I didn't see this, I haven't seen everything, but what you tell me is that there are particles on the beach, and there's a lot of asbestos has caused the deaths of asbestos is mesothelioma. That's one of the diseases of lung diseases that are caused by asbestos. Why hasn't this been solved? Why hasn't this been regulated? What is the problem?
Well, there are several reasons. One of them is that we have regulatory agencies that are supposed to be the watchdogs, the U.S. EPA, the Illinois EPA, and other agencies, CDC, ATSDR. They are these agencies that are supposed to protect the public. But this was going on for a number of years. Jeff mentioned that around 1990, 1991, an industrial hygienist from Great Lakes found some material, and he took it to the state and to the feds, and they analyzed it, and it was asbestos. Because he was a credentialed person, they had to really entertain this. They picked up 34 tons of asbestos-containing material on the beaches in that one particular area. And then in 1999, when Charles Nicodemus, a veteran investigative reporter with the Chicago Sun-Times, I think he was a Pulitzer Prize winner, broke a series of stories that were front-page stories in the Sun-Times, the agencies were wringing their hands, saying, oh my goodness, we need to find the sources of this asbestos. We don't know anything about it. When documents then came out later that showed that they knew about it, they had gotten together, they quietly cleaned it up, but they pretended that this wasn't, this was something new.
Why is it that? I mean, is it that expensive?
Because they're the regulators.
Can we get just fresh sand, or I mean, I would think that each suburb, like say for instance, Lake Forest, all the suburbs that are on the shoreline, Highland Park, Lake Forest, Glencoe, all the way down Winnetka, all the way down to Oak Street Beach, at each municipality would do some work on their own. I mean, they want to keep their people in their suburbs free and cancer-free. Why aren't they doing this study? I mean, if the state, the state right now, they say they're broke and they can't afford to, do all this. But each little suburb can do it on their own.
Well, the governments the municipal governments rely on the state regulators and the federal regulators and enforcers to do that kind of work, and they go through the motions, but in many cases it's not protective. simply because they do studies, and the studies then are inconclusive, they're filled with scientific fraud. And so the motivation of many of these regulatory agencies is to cover up their past sins. In other words, turning the other way and pretending the asbestos wasn't there years earlier. Turning the other way on the state level because it's prudent, because they receive pressure from the director of the agency in the state, from a legislator as an example, to give this particular polluter a pass or minimize the effect. And there are several issues, but it comes down to scientific fraud and manipulation. The public officials do not want to be held culpable. And if the public finds out that the regulators were supposed to protect them, and they weren't doing this, they're going to want heads on platters.
Well, I mean, if I was a state rep, you know, I would, and I heard something like this. I mean, I would, you know, for my constituency, I would want to do it immediately. I mean, wouldn't that be the thing that people would want to do? I don't understand.
In today's economy, especially, nobody wants to find a problem that doesn't have a real easy solution to. There aren't the deep pockets to go after to clean up this pollution, because the state and the federal government cut a side deal with Johns Manville to limit their liability on the pollution. So we, in essence, own this pollution. So not too many municipalities are going to want to spend money to find a problem that's only going to want to spend more money to solve and bring up a lot of these concerns.
Now, they're not still dumping their, or whatever.
Well, the waste is still being spread. And so, for instance, when we look at, well,
the company still exists
no,
today?
Well,
the company's still there?
The site is still a pollution site.
Okay.
It's still being cleaned up.
Okay.
You know, I'm sure many of your viewers are saying, well, what does this have to do with Highland Park? All right, we're talking about someplace way up by the Wisconsin border. The bottom line is the study that was done in Illinois, they tested background areas to say that really the beaches up at Illinois Beach State Park were no more dangerous than anywhere else, and they were shocked to find out that Oak Street Beach had the highest levels. And I did bring a graphic. If they could put the first graphic up there, it's a little bit hard to see, but what I identified was, it's a chart from the study that was done by the Attorney General's office.
Okay, I think we got your chart.
And they identified Oak Street Beach as having the highest levels of asbestos contamination. Now, the Attorney General's response to this was to eliminate those results from their final report. Now, what I highlighted here was this type of testing they did, tested Highland Park, and they found the lowest levels of asbestos in Highland Park. And so citizens of Highland Park would say, well, that's great news, we're glad to hear this.
But
unfortunately, the state did a second round of testing using a different method. This was called a sonification method, and if anybody's cleaned jewelry before, you know it has a little sonification thing where you put your jewelry in and it kind of agitates it. They did that with the sand, and if we put the next graphic up there, that testing result showed when you agitate the sand, I highlighted there, Highland Park had by far the highest levels of asbestos.
Wow.
So what the Attorney General said with that result was, well, since asbestos is an airborne hazard, we won't talk about the ground or the sediments being shaken up and disturbed because it's not getting in the air. However, when you talk about dredging your shoreline, which you have some proposed projects, in fact, the Park District dredges all the time, that's exactly what happens, is it stirs all that stuff up. That contamination gets kicked up and then washes on the shoreline where our children play. And that's what our concern is.
You know, it almost sounds like the Erin Brockovich, remember the movie where there was contaminated drinking water? Right. And they were ignoring it, and people were getting sick, and they were getting all kinds of cancers and dying, and nothing was being done because it was just, you know, really wasn't really happening. And here something is happening and no one's doing anything about it. And what is your suggestion? What can be done about it? I mean, does it mean that we have to take all the sand from the beaches and get rid of the old sand? Or what about putting new fresh sand where children play? What are some of your suggestions for this?
First of all, you need to stop the discharge. There still is a discharge pipe up at the Superfund site at Johns Manville. That needs to be stopped. You need to stop the dumping. The Army Corps of Engineers Commonwealth Edison, Midwest Generation, along with IDNR,
and they're still dumping? They're dumping in the
approval of the
lake?
state agencies, they would dredge, and they still dump this sand that has asbestos in it on the lakefront, offshore, and it begins to roll in, it gets on the beach, and contaminates. You have to do that, then there's a series of studies that need to be done, independent scientific studies, because the government agencies have frankly let us all down. And with this scientific fraud, well, the culmination of the Attorney General's report was that from that point on, the local municipalities that do their annual dredging for their boat ramps would then need to take sand samples and follow a protocol. Well, we called the Illinois EPA one day and said, why aren't they following the protocol, more sensitive tests to determine if there's asbestos in this dredged sand? I pressured him and pressured this person, Springfield, US EPA, Illinois EPA, excuse me, and he said, we received a call from a legislator. And the legislator in this area, Karen May, had put a little pressure on us. And we actually we lightened up on this municipality because it was too expensive to do the tests. So the fix was in. So we can't, in essence, we can't trust government and these agencies that are regulators and enforcers to do the job. We need some independent peer-reviewed testing. Jeff, you have some more details on that.
Now you're Jeff. You're president of Cahnmann Environmental Services. What is it that you do? What is your qualifications for these tests, and your understanding of what's going on? What are your qualifications on this?
Well, I was one of the first licensed asbestos professionals in Illinois. I got involved in the asbestos industry very early in my career. But over the past 20, 25 years, I've set up asbestos laboratories. I teach the US EPA training courses on asbestos for over 25 years. So all these people that remove asbestos from your schools and buildings, I've trained most of those individuals there.
So it sounds like you're quite qualified.
Yeah. Now, one of the things, in fact, I did an evaluation of some of this rig testing that was done by the Attorney General's office on the sand, and I was invited to a congressional subcommittee hearing where I testified on some of this rigging, and I was shocked to see that the federal agency that was brought in Illinois to look at what the state was doing, they had been rigging studies all over the place. In fact, somebody who had testified at this hearing, to kind of tie it back into layman's terms, they said the EPA or state agencies would shoot an arrow in the wall, and these other agencies would come in and paint a bullseye around it in the form of a report to show them how accurate their assumptions were. And unfortunately, what we have is what Paul had mentioned early on, is nobody wants to let out the secret that this contamination is spread. And I would challenge the officials in Highland Park. Had anybody from the Attorney General's office back in 2004, when they learned there was these high levels of contamination on your shores, did anybody communicate that information, or did they quietly just exclude it from their report and keep it under wraps and not tell anybody? So when you talk to the Park District, when you talk to city officials, they're going to say, well, the Attorney General's office told us everything's fine, everything's safe. I would bet they're not even aware of some of the data that I just showed you here, and this data is 8 years old. So part of the solution is communicating what is known, letting people know that we don't know what the true risk is. I personally wouldn't let children play in the sand on the beaches. If adults want to walk on the beach, adults can smoke cigarettes, adults can drive cars fast, they can do all kinds of crazy things. But children are at greater risk from this asbestos exposure. So that would be one of the first things.
What would you do with the children? Because I know children loved going on beaches in the summertime. And, what should they do? Would there be like a special sand area, fresh sand?
Sure, you can have clean sand areas that don't deal with directly on the beach areas. But certainly letting parents know, here's the risk that's out there. And when parents, most parents are going to be a little bit more on the protective side than put their kids at greater risk. So if they don't get that information, then they're not able to protect their kids, and that's probably one of the biggest concerns that we have.
And one of the things that was put together a short time ago was an asbestos flyer. There are tips as to what to do when you go out on the beach, and it's a long story, but
when you say asbestos flyer,
it's a flyer. It's a flyer that was
those?
put together by Dunesland, and it's available on the Illinois Dunesland website. So that's illinois.dunesland.org.
You know, why don't
it's
they
all
put
on
it in
there.
the newspaper? You know, a lot of people
Well,
don't.
it has
yeah.
been. It's been published. It's been
Yeah.
put in the newspaper.
I would probably
but it's
take
on,
a whole page
It's on the well.
in the news. I would
you'd
take a
like
whole
to.
page in
Right,
Sun-Times, a whole page in the
But it's-
Tribune, a whole page in Pioneer Press. You know, I mean,
Well,
not
yeah.
just
we
a
need
little
to, we need to get
blurb.
somebody
Yes.
to pay for it, but it's on the website and it's readily available. And I know we tried to get that posted in the office at DNR at the park office, and they stopped it. They didn't want it up. We had to sue them, and we still didn't prevail. But they will stop free speech.
I think if you go directly to the newspapers themselves and come on shows like mine and other people's that have shows that are even shows that are other, you know, Channel 11, Channel 5, all the other news stations, I think you need to get the word out. This is really important. You know, I have grandchildren, and, you know, I have small grandchildren, and some of them are, you know, and they're at the beach, and I worry about it. You know, I didn't worry about it until I met you two. Now that I met you two, I have a lot of concerns. I mean, you know, I did not know about this. This is what I just learned just recently.
Well, Suzanne, it's a consciousness thing. It's a tipping point, the book, and that is you get the communication out, you get it in newspapers. Remember, I mentioned the Sun-Times. Charles Nicodemus did several front-page stories on the asbestos. We do get on talk shows. We do get more into the newspaper. The Waukegan News-Sun has been very instrumental. The Tribune has done some wonderful stories on exposing this. But it's reaching that saturation point where people go, aha, it's there. There's another interesting thing to look at, the Environmental Working Group, EWG. You can Google them. They actually did a chart of Lake Michigan, and they show the mesothelioma, the deaths in Illinois around Lake Michigan. Actually, they rank in the top 5 in the country. Is that right, Jeff?
Yeah, Cook County and Lake County have some of the highest asbestos-related deaths. Now, again, some of those are from manufacturing and business and the military. But they estimate about 30 or 40% are from non-occupational or job-related exposure.
Well, let me ask
Very
you,
serious.
what can concerned citizens do to stop the spreading of this asbestos contamination along the shoreline? As citizens, what can we do? I mean, we have a half-hour show. I wish I could go on and on and on because there's so many different examples you can give us. But what can the concerned citizens, now that they're hearing this for the first time?
Well, some of the things that can make these citizens very successful is social media, getting out to the press, first of all, getting it out everywhere, demonstrating.
Demanding testing. I think we're demanding.
And then short of
tested,
that, public officials will try and shut you down. And the way to open it up is you then file lawsuits. And there are pro bono law firms and lawyers that do that, against the government agencies and the individuals within the government agencies, so they're personally liable. Watch them get religion. That's what you have to do. All the talking is done, all the letters are in, all the research is done, all the scientific fraud is done. As we discussed before, you need these independent peer review studies, but you also need to file lawsuits, and you need to use social media and get that demonstration out there into the public.
Yeah, because right now everybody's so concerned about, you know, the politicians on Obamacare versus this care and not that care. And here's something that's in our community in Illinois, where the President of the United States comes from, and the beaches are full of asbestos. And does he know that this is his beach? This is where he brings his children when he comes to Illinois? Does the President, is he aware? Are either
well, I can tell you,
when
we had contacted the President when he was state senator, and when I testified in front of Congress, we certainly brought that up as well. But I guess the things that I would leave your North Shore viewers with is they still dredge right near the John Mansville Superfund site that's contaminated with asbestos. They also dredge in the contaminated...
When you're saying dredge, what do you mean by
dig up
dredging?
the sediments to kind of clear it up for boats to go in and for water to flow.
And where do they put them?
And right now, they used to dump it on the shoreline, but since we brought so much publicity to that, they don't do it. Now they dump it farther to the south, right off the North Shore communities. So many of you may see, they usually do it in the wintertime when nobody's looking, but you'll see these barges go dumping this sand, and that's the contaminated sand from up north. So when people are asking where is this stuff coming from, it's the Army Corps of Engineers, it's the Illinois Department of Natural Resources, it's the Illinois EPA that's allowing this contamination to continue to this day. So our first step is stop the pollution from flowing. Then let's try to figure out what we're going to do with the mess that we currently have.
Yeah, because what are they going to do? I mean, kids, you know how kids like to, you know, jump on piles of sand and dirt and climb. These kids, you know, maybe after school, they're climbing on these things.
Well, in the sand, anybody who's been to the beach knows sand tracks home with you. It tracks home in your car, it tracks home on your clothing. Anybody who's brought a blanket or a towel to the beach will shake it off, and we know contamination flies off. If I told you that had asbestos in it, that's a problem.
So people should be, when they bring home the beach toys, before they let the kids play with it again, they should wash it off? What should be done?
You should decontaminate it. One other little thing I wanted to mention is there was a study done up at Illinois Beach, again, of simulating a child building a sandcastle, and the air levels of asbestos were so high that if we found those levels in a school building, that school building would be shut down.
Oh my God.
But because it was on a non-regulated beach, both the state and the federal government said it was fine, which we thought was kind of outrageous, because those are the activities that you see on a beach area. So
you see, the government officials will do anything to downplay the asbestos because of their own involvement and their own culpability, to the extent of committing scientific fraud, to the extent of criminal behavior. The Illinois Dunesland Preservation Society, and it's on our website.
Which you're the president of.
Right, actually did a complaint to U.S. Attorney Fitzgerald, and turned about 100 documents in, 100 pages worth. And they sat on it, and it's very embarrassing because US EPA, CDC, ATSDR, these are federal agencies, they're all involved along with the state agencies that are regulators. So since they govern everything and they control everything, that's generally a conflict of interest now for most agencies or police authorities to do anything about these agencies.
And they're covering it up because it's going to cost the state too much money? Is that the whole thing?
Well, they're basically the polluter. They allowed this contamination that they knew was there to be dumped on the beach because the state was getting free sand. In the past, they were paying about $500,000 a year for sand. Here they thought they could get free sand that was being dug up by Commonwealth Edison.
I see, so it's all free.
And so now that it turned out to this asbestos they didn't think would be a big issue. Well, now that it is an issue, the last thing they want is a paper trail coming back to them that, one, they knew this had asbestos, and now for the last 20 years they've been covering it up.
So there's no such thing as a free lunch, is there? That's the old expression.
No.
That's pretty heavy duty.
If you're a government official and you're charged to regulate, okay, if there's pollution, you regulate, you enforce, and you don't, and you look the other way, in some circles, that's actually called obstruction of justice, and that's a criminal activity. And so public officials are very concerned about being caught involved in obstruction of justice because they went beyond their charge. They looked the other way, and they were charged to do it. They violated the public trust, but they also allowed millions of people to be unwittingly exposed to asbestos.
And these are the people that we elect. I mean, we have to be very careful who we elect because, you know, they have to make sure that they have us in mind, the safety of our children in mind, the safety of adults in mind, seniors in mind, when we're electing people in office. And I see that we only have a minute more to the show. And, you know, I want to really begin to thank you guys for coming on the show. What we do need is a follow-up, you know, maybe a follow-up study of what you are going to be doing to get more of this out to the public, because I think this is really important. You need to go on more and more television stations. You need to get on radio shows. You need to really get the message out of what's happening in Illinois. And, you know, who knows what could be happening in other states too, but we're really understanding what's happening in Illinois. Paul, I want to thank you for coming on the show. Paul is the president of the Illinois Dunesland Preservation Society, and Jeffrey Cahnmann, it's you have a hard name, president of the environment. You have your own agency of environmental services. I want to thank you. This was a very controversial show, and it brought me a lot of what's happening in our state that I wasn't aware of, and if I'm not aware of it, there's so many other people that aren't aware of it, our viewers. Thank you very much.
We're glad to help.
conflict is always kind of the gravity of storytelling. You know, it's hard. It's almost impossible to make a film or a play or a novel without conflict. It's sort of what propels people forward, and in life too. I think conflict often drives us forward. I think people might just sit back and be a little too satisfied if there wasn't some sort of pressing need. Even just the aspect of it being, you know, mortal. Just you know, that's always an ever-present conflict. The fact that we're aging and that we only have so much time, that drives us forward and motivates us to accomplish things. Same thing goes for all characters. So even if, you know, you're living in Shangri-La, there's still mortality that's always there to, you know, push you to explore new things or to not be so satisfied that you don't continue to learn or you have adventures. And that's the same thing with a character in a film. There's always got to be something that pushes them from this scene to the next scene to the next scene.
And then they come back with the reward, or they're exposed with their challenges.
Right.
Like all of us are.
Yeah. It goes back to the Greeks, and Joseph Campbell talks about it. It's universal. There's a character, there's a goal, there's obstacles to the goal, and the whole storytelling process is the character trying to weave around or jump over or break through obstacles to get to that goal. It's a simple concept, but it's in every single piece of writing or storytelling that you'll see.
Otherwise we wouldn't bother.
What's the point? What I tell my students when I'm teaching and what I do as a filmmaker is there's always a question in the back of an audience's head, whether you're reading a newspaper article or watching a film, which is, what's the point of this? Why am I here? Why am I putting my time into this film, into this book, into this newspaper article? What's significant about this? And without that conflict and without being able to relate to that character, that protagonist, you're not going to be able to answer that question.
That's right. In Turkish coffee,